My friends, scammers continue to go after the elderly. Although I think the complaint has just been filed, and this happened a while back once the family member had an opportunity to review the documents and find out that millions had been scammed. One of the questions is who's at fault here? Okay. What if the banks see transactions that look suspicious, but don't check in with the family members to say, hey, is this really where you want to be sending money? Thailand, $49,000. Is this what you want to be doing? In this video, I'm going to be looking at the complaint. But first, I want to go over to this USA Today article because this is where it all started. This is where I found out about it. We're going to break it all down. Then we're going to go to the complaint, find out exactly what's being alleged here. Ms. Legalista, aka Attorney Shelia here. Let's dive in.
Yeah.
Why would 76-year-old Larry Cook transfer $3.6 million out of the country before his death? That is the primary question facing anyone who's reading this article and asking themselves, yeah, what was going on with this? And as this article is really pointing out, should the bank have done more? Should they have noticed? Should they have said more? I'm going to be looking at the complaint, but first I want to look at this article. Janine Satterfield, this was his niece, who is the one who's responsible for his estate. Apparently, he had served the country in the U.S. Navy for 24 years until 1992. He had no children, no spouse. They discovered this mystery when she needed to find his social security number to bury him. A nearby neighbor, she asked to go into his home in Virginia for his documents, instead sent photos of international wire transfers he made in amounts as large as $49,500, going mostly to Thailand. It says her uncle, he kept meticulous records. He became a victim of a scam that started in October 2020 and continued until March 21, and he died a day later. Now, Satterfield, the niece, is suing Wells Fargo. Okay, it says Cook made about 75 international transfers. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of background on how this came to be, because, I mentioned this in a lot of videos now that these scammers are out there working 24/7 and they love to target our elderly, family, friends, and neighbors. So we got to be just as vigilant about protecting their money as the scammers are about taking it. We got to work just as hard here. He had accounts at Wells Fargo and Navy Federal Credit Union, you guys. Yeah. She alleges that Cook's credit union was negligent for not stopping the numerous wires and undertook the duty to protect him following the voluntary report that they made to Adult Protective Services. Aha. So this heightens the level of duty for them. It's like, oh, well, they've actually made a statement here. But you know what? Now that we've got some info from this article, because I'm telling you, this sort of news we need to stay on top of. Let's go to the complaint, though, and just break this down and see exactly what it is that she is alleging. Estate of Larry Cook. Janine Satterfield, in her capacity as administrator, this is against Wells Fargo. This is the amended complaint, you guys. His mother predeceased him. There was a trust, and that was a whole bunch of pages. I did not download that. Well, I did, but we are not going to be looking at that. It says Navy Federal Credit Union was one of two banks that Mr. Cook held a savings and checking account at, and was the bank that allowed Mr. Cook to wire out approximately 74 international wire transfers for a total amount of approximately $3,631,200. Really? In addition, Mr. Cook incurred $1,850 in wire transfer fees. Yeah. All right, let's skip all past that. Let's get to the statement of facts because this is what we're interested in. We want to know what happened here. Who dropped the ball? Who should have had the ball? Who should have had the ball here? All right, Mr. Cook died April 21st, 2021. Prior to his death, he had been a highly decorated Navy veteran, having served this country for over 24 years, with an additional 20 years of service in the private sector for government contracts. He was educated in Seattle, went to University of Washington, retired as a commander in 1992, having served since 1968. He was commissioned as an officer. This goes all through his Navy service. He was a submarine officer. He was employed with Booz Allen Hamilton. They've got some exhibits in here. All right. It says, from a cognitive perspective, Mr. Cook was highly intelligent and managed his affairs, including his finances, very well before his health declined due to a stroke in 2019. NFCU, which is Navy Federal Credit Union, knew Mr. Cook's rank and grade with the U.S. Navy. He had an estimated net worth of approximately $8 million to $10 million. Additionally, prior to his death, Mr. Cook was the trustee and beneficiary of the EJM Trust, which had an approximate value of about $2 million. All right. There was never any doubt as to his fitness for the role of trustee. During his lifetime, he only used two primary banks, NFCU and Wells Fargo. He also managed two of his own rental properties in Washington State. Those accounts were with the same banks also. He first opened those accounts back in the 1970s. So as you can see, there's a lot of history here. His banking history with both financial institutions is such that he was not conducting business using wire transfers to foreign banks. He was a very conservative spender and would not spend money unless necessary. Okay, so this is an interesting point to make right off the bat here. Interesting because what they're saying is, now, if you go back and look at his account over all of these years, because this is what they're saying, he's had these accounts with these institutions going back years. He was conservative in terms of how he spent his money. It would seem to most people that there would be some sort of red flag or trigger that would happen if all of a sudden someone in their 70s started sending out wire transfers to Thailand. And it's not something that they usually do in their capacity. So already the niece is alleging that these were red flags right here. And because he had been with your banks for so long, you knew what his history was. And therefore, these should have looked suspicious to you. This is where they're going with that. All right. He was never married, had no children prior to her death, his mother. Mr. Cook had been managing her assets long distance, but there came a time when his diligence and management started declining. He was a meticulous record keeper. He retained records for a number of different events and kept records of all of his tax returns. However, all that stopped when he suffered an acute stroke on or around July 15, 2019. He awoke at home with impaired coordination. He did not seek medical help for over 14 hours, which made him ineligible for aggressive anti-clot therapy on arrival to the hospital, depriving him of an opportunity to minimize neurologic deficits. In fact, Mr. Cook had attempted to drive himself to his primary care physician, but had a minor motor vehicle accident on the way. So this goes over what happened with the stroke. He was left with weakness, impaired sensation, facial droop, cognitive impairment, impulsiveness, impaired judgment. It says here, all making him highly vulnerable to undue influence and financial exploitation, and impaired his capacity to make reasoned and rational judgments or decisions regarding his personal health and management of his finances. By June 2020, he was forced to retire. His social isolation, more likely than not, exacerbated his vulnerability to undue influence and financial exploitation. The cognitive deficits produced by the stroke were unlikely to significantly improve over time. Subsequent to his stroke, he stopped filing his personal income tax returns. and failed to file them for his mother. He did manage to transfer some money with one of the accounts. He also stopped assisting with the attorney handling the trust, and he was having some significant health issues. All right, so let's go back here. It says on October 5th, 2020, Mr. Cook received an unsolicited email from what appeared to be the company Amazon informing him of his recent purchase of an iPad and even providing instructions for whom to call with questions regarding this recent purchase. A copy of said email is attached here too and incorporated herein as Exhibit 4. Unbeknownst to Mr. Cook, he was falling prey to a very elaborate and fraudulent scam, a scam which Navy Federal Credit Union later warned its customers about in a December 3rd, 2020 customer alert titled Fake Calls from Apple and Amazon Support, What You Need to Know, a copy of which is attached here too and incorporated herein as Exhibit 5. Okay, so let's think about that. He received his email in October. They sent out their warning in December. Now, and it's likely they had some knowledge of that. Somebody wants to buy my house. Like, no. It's likely they probably knew of that a little bit in advance of when it went out. They had some time to put together their warning. But how did they really make sure that customers were receiving that, and were they following up with them? And is this their duty? Okay, because this is the question here. Whose duty is this? Whose duty is this? And this is why I'm doing this video, because a lot of times, just like they pointed out in this complaint here, you have a person who has a stroke. They don't have any more family members. The mother's died. They don't have any children. They're not married, and all of a sudden they're in this space where they don't necessarily have a whole lot of people around them that they can count on to help them look after financial matters. And this is when you see scams take hold. Take hold. All right. It says, given his medical status, his social isolation, and enfeebled state, Mr. Cook was without capacity to manage his finances, and he was susceptible to financial exploitation and needed the protection of a conservator. On October 6, 2020, after receipt of the fraudulent email, Mr. Cook sent out the first wire from his Navy Federal Credit Union checking account to a stated individual with an account at Standard Chartered in Singapore. This wire was made in person at the Vienna, Virginia NFCU branch. Okay, so that's a detail. Details matter. Let me stop here. Details can make or break you. That's a detail, because it's not something where they're saying, he set something up and was at home and just, did a sort of transaction and it was arm's length from us and we were really not aware of it. No, they made a point of saying he went to the credit union, because there's a lot of money. You're not really going to be able to do that at home most times. Okay, you're going to have to go in the credit union most of the time to do this. He was in the credit union. Did nobody ask him questions like, hey, you're sending quite a bit of money to Singapore. Do you have family members there? Oh, okay. So you purchased something from Amazon. You're sending it. Who are you sending it to? You know, they see his age, like they have an opportunity to ask questions. And I get it. Okay. This is a personal account. If you're the teller, you probably have policies that you have to follow. So I'm not saying the person didn't do their job. These are just questions we're asking. Should banks now institute new policies or change the policies that they have regarding when people want to come in and transfer large sums of money to Singapore? Well, now it becomes difficult to say, well, hey, we're just going to ask that of all people who look of a certain age. I mean, now that starts to sound like age discrimination. But there are other questions here. It's not just his age, it's where it's going. It's how much is going. It's that when they pull up his account on the computer, they don't see a whole bunch of transactions before that look like wires all over the world. No, apparently they're saying he was very conservative. So I think what they're trying to get at is this was something out of the ordinary, and Wells Fargo maybe should have asked some questions, should have asked more questions. If they didn't, I don't know. But this is kind of where I'm thinking they're going. This is why these details are so important. And this is why these details are in here. It says this wire was made in person at the Vienna, Virginia branch. They want you to know that. Also, on October 6, 2020, Mr. Cook contacted Navy Federal Credit Union to check his checking account balance, stating, "We're moving money around due to an fraudulent charge," so his mistake there, "on another system, and I need to validate what the current balance is." It was clear he was not necessarily using appropriate language to describe the fraudulent activity. Nonetheless, Navy Federal Credit Union was immediately on notice of some sort of fraudulent activity associated with Mr. Cook. The balance in his checking account on that day was $612,451.34. So now, see how important these details are? Now, so he's been in there and sent some money to Thailand, and now he's calling, and the person on the other end of that phone who gets that phone call and pulls that account up. Now think about it. The person at the bank's one person, the person on the phone is somebody else different. So it's not like it's one person. It's not like you're going in and talking to the same person every single time you go in and call or whatever. Okay, we know that's not the case. If that were the case, then it'd be easier for the person to say, well, wait a second, didn't you just send some money to Thailand? But here, this person can pull it up and see, well, you just did a wire transfer to Thailand too. I wonder if that has something to do with a fraudulent account. I wonder if they put any, you know, a freeze on the account or anything like that. Did they talk to him about that? This would be something interesting to know. I doubt if they still have the records. They record a lot of these conversations. I doubt if they still have those records, though. But let's see what we're going on to next. All right. Between the time period of October 6, 2020 through April 20th, 2021, a day before his death, he sent out a total of 75 international wire transfers to stated individuals holding accounts with Standard Chartered and the Bank of Bangkok for a grand total of over $3 million. I can't, this is heartbreaking. Nearly all of the wire transfers were in the amount of $49,500 to what appears to be a fictitious name and address, and stated that the purpose was for a loan repayment. What loan? What loan? Copies of the wire transfer receipts are attached. A total of 75 international wires were sent. 74 were sent by Navy Federal Credit Union. Only one was successfully sent through Wells Fargo. Oh, that would be interesting to hear more about that. Having been an account holder since the 1970s, both banks have or should have a long history of Mr. Cook's daily transactions and standard purchases, and should have seen that prior to that date, he had never previously sent any international or domestic wire. Didn't I tell you? I said that before. It's like all of a sudden this is going on, and he's how old? And this just seems out of character. This seems out of character. Not from a personal standpoint, but from a financial standpoint. He's had this account there how long? On November 3rd, 2020, after sending out approximately 15 wires and basically liquidating his Navy Federal Credit Union account, he went to Wells Fargo, where he sent out one international wire from his Wells Fargo checking account. Sometime between November 3rd, 2020 and November 6th, 2020, Mr. Cook attempted to send a second one from Wells Fargo. However, he was denied and ultimately ended up sending a domestic wire transfer from Wells Fargo to his Navy Federal Credit Union account. The exact reason that Wells Fargo denied Mr. Cook's international wire request is unknown. So it makes you wonder whether they were thinking, we don't like this, but we don't know. We don't know. On November 10th, 2020, just 5 days after Wells Fargo denied the wire request, Mr. Cook was able to successfully send the same wire and 61 subsequent wires by going to Navy Federal Credit Union, which uses Wells Fargo as an intermediary bank to process its wires. All right, on December 15th, 2020, after approximately 28 wires had been sent out, Navy Federal Credit Union representative reported Mr. Cook to Fairfax County Adult Protective Services for what was detailed as incoming wires and outgoing wires were conducted in a manner indicative of possible elder financial exploitation. A copy of the APS report is attached here too. You guys, we're going to look at that in another video. Um, okay, so this is really, really heartbreaking. And I mean, he's deceased at this point, so it's not, it's not the piece, it's not necessarily like the amount of money or that sort of thing. It's just heartbreaking that he was in a position that people took advantage of him like this, and that there was no one there to protect him, and that it took this long for them to start to suspect that something was not right, and we need to contact adult protective services to see, what's going on, and to have someone look into this. Maybe what we need to be focusing on is helping banks and their employees be on the lookout even more. Because apparently, I'm sure they're on the lookout, but it sounds like we got to up this because, like I said, the scammers are scamming all the time. In fact, the report reflects the following information. Between October 6, 2020 and December, incoming wires and outgoing wires were conducted in a manner indicative of possible elder financial exploitation, totaling over 2 million. The incoming wires were totaling over 1 million, along with Mr. Cook's direct deposits. And the sourced outgoing wire activity totaled over 1 million. The member has no history of such activity. Aha, there we go. There we go. Now they're saying this. Okay, this is December. The reason for the outgoing wires was loan repayment. According to numerous notes in our back office system, the member has been warned numerous times that he is the victim of a scam, but he still wants to proceed with the wires. I'm just crushed. I'm crushed. I'm crushed because it tells you that his capacity was likely not there, that they were telling him. Now, I don't know if you recall the video that I did with Glenda, who was the money mule, and she talked about my love. She did the video for the FBI so that they could help warn other people not to fall for romance scams like this. And she met this person she called my love, and the person was sending her, you know, it, I guess like equipment and electronics and stuff like that she was repackaging and sending back out, and money and all this sort of stuff. And they kept telling her, no, I think it was bank officials maybe, kept telling her, this is a scam. You're going to get in trouble. This is wrong. You need to stop doing this. And she didn't stop. She kept doing it. And this was some person that she had never even met face to face. And so this is how caught up people can get when there's nobody else in their life immediately around them who can help them with this. And so she wound up pleading guilty to 2 felonies, even though people were telling her this is a scam. And so we're hearing the same thing here again. They were telling him, this is what it says, they were telling him. And this is what's so unfortunate. It says here, the member has been warned numerous times that he is the victim of a scam, but he still wants to proceed with the wires. He appears to be mentally competent. Other account activity for the member reflects seemingly normal transactions and bill payments. APS communicated to Mr. Cook's bank that there was a risk for financial exploitation and asked that his accounts continue to be monitored. So we're just going to monitor him at this point. Part of the funds received into Mr. Cook's account came from Chase Bank. Prior to this report, it appears that Navy Federal Credit Union never questioned, reported, or even attempted to stop any of Mr. Cook's international wires, and instead, even after the APS report was made, continued to process at least another 42 wires. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot to keep doing. The tortious conduct by Navy Federal Credit Union was continuous over the incredibly brief period of time, ceasing only because of his death. When Navy Federal Credit Union continued, it had numerous notes in its back office system. When administrator subpoenaed their records through a court-ordered expansion of powers, none of those notes were ever produced. There's a court order. Additionally, in the APS report investigation, the section titled Risk of Harm, it is stated that APS learned that wire transfers continue to occur after the referral had been received. The risk for financial exploitation is high. Upon completion of its investigation, APS sent a letter to Navy Federal Credit Union. It says the investigation has been completed, and at this time, Mr. Cook is in need of protective services. Available and appropriate services will be offered. At no such time before, during, or after making a report to APS did Navy Federal Credit Union stop wiring the money out. In fact, on or about February 1st, 2021, Navy Federal Credit Union called Mr. Cook to inquire further about the wire transfers. So they had some questions. Okay, again, details. They had some questions. Now they're calling him. How often does your bank call you? Does your bank just call you and say, hey, what's up? What's going on? What'd you have for lunch? What you cooking for dinner? Banks don't do that. They call when there's an issue, when they have concerns. You need to come put some more money in your account because we got a check here and there's not enough in there. Like they call like that. They don't just call just to be calling. So they're saying here something else was going on and they knew it. This is what they're alleging. Navy Federal Credit Union called Mr. Cook to inquire further about the wire transfers. Mr. Cook's notes, his notes, state that Navy Federal Credit Union reported a red flag on the receiving end, in addition to asking him further questions about the wire transfers. Nevertheless, they sent Mr. Cook documents to continue the wire transfers and continue to process his request despite having a reason to suspect that something improper was happening. At no time since the completion of the investigation and notification by APS that he was in need of protective services did Navy Federal Credit Union attempt to intervene or halt the wire transfers. You know, I think if I were Navy Credit Federal Union, I'd just settle this. Navy Federal Credit Union was negligent in allowing Mr. Cook to make these irregular and fraudulent wire transfers, having been put on notice of fraudulent activity and having assumed a duty by reporting him to APS. They failed to monitor his account for suspicious, irregular, fraudulent, and or unauthorized activity. They failed to timely recognize that the wire transfers were suspicious, irregular, and fraudulent. By reporting the situation to APS, they assumed a duty with respect to Mr. Cook, like, hey, yeah, let us know. And did they? Did they stop? By state law, they had every ability to shut down the account and or to bring a conservatorship action to intercede on Mr. Cook's behalf, even if he protested. So that's the thing here. Think about that. If this were a bad actor, do you know how quickly they would do something because they know their bank's at risk? When it's a bad actor in the bank, when the bad actor is a member, they step up. Okay, they're just like, wait, no, 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 no. Okay, but they didn't do that here. Why? Why do you think they did not do something here? It says Navy Federal Credit Union failed to protect Mr. Cook's funds by timely terminating or suspending wire transfers and or freezing his account or taking any other reasonable step to halt, including after it had alerted Mr. Cook that the transactions were likely related to a fraudulent scheme. They failed to reasonably investigate the reason why Mr. Cook was wiring funds. Yeah, $49,500 in a foreign account in Bangkok, all these different transactions. This is a simple inquiry regarding the addresses of the so-called banking locations and or recipients to where the wire transfers were being delivered would have revealed that some of the locations were storefronts or back alleys and most likely fictitious. For example, the cover sheet for the January 28, 2021 wire transfer reveals that the address of the person to whom the wire was directed was 165 alley behind the old. Oh, I am hurt with this one. I am. I'm just hurt because it seems like a person would have said, are you sure that's the place? Like, I'm confused. Do y'all Google like I Google? Because I Google all the time. When I see something that just looks weird, the first thing I do is Google it. I'm like, is that let me put that in here and see what comes up. It's like, well, that's not going to a bank. That's not going to a legitimate business that might be an international business that takes wires from people in the US. It just seems odd. That's what I would do. That the fact that it has alley in it would be like the it's like flashing lights. I don't know. Like I said, maybe Federal Credit Union should just settle at this point. If I were their attorney, I'd be like, how much do you want to settle? When do you want to settle? Let's settle now. And then let's talk about how we're going to change some things, how we're going to make things better so that this doesn't happen again. That's the kind of thing I'd be saying here. Look at that. 165 alley behind the old Freya Karai Temple. What? Most of the wire transfers were to different people. See, that's kind of weird too, because usually if it's loan repayment, why are you sending it to all these different people? That doesn't make any sense. And were for almost the exact same amounts. Mr. Cook never produced any loan documents to any bank, and he was not asked. And what are the chances that an individual with as clean of a banking and creditor background as Mr. Cook had would have over 74 individuals to whom he owed money, paid within 7 months? Again, it just does not make any sense. It just does not add up. It is also unclear at this time what information Wells Fargo had regarding the wire transfers it was processing for Mr. Cook in its role as intermediary bank for Navy Federal Credit Union. Wells Fargo had reason to believe that Mr. Cook was a vulnerable person and a victim of financial abuse and potentially could have prevented these transactions. It is unclear how they were not able to identify Mr. Cook as the maker of the wire transfers and stop them. Yeah, sorry. Plaintiff subpoenaed documents related to the agreements between Wells Fargo and Naval Financial Credit Union and did not receive any in response. Such information should be made available during discovery in this case. All right, so they're saying there was an assumption of voluntary duty here. And this goes on. They're saying breach of the covenant of good faith and fair dealing, negligence, voluntary assumption of duty. They owed him a duty of care. Over $3 million gone. Says plaintiff respectfully requests that this court enter judgment against the defendant Navy Federal Credit Union in the amount of $3,633,050 plus pre and post judgment interest, attorney's fees, and costs, and such further relief as this honorable court deems appropriate. You guys, that's a lot of money. And like I said, this is yeah, let's see who's the counsel for Wells Fargo. McGuire Woods. All right, Troutman Pepper. Yeah, that's a lot of money. And we won't know all of the details. Again, these are just the allegations in the complaint about what the niece has been able to see so far. And there are other documents out there. This is me just looking at this amended complaint right now. So there's some other documents out there. But imagine, Wells Fargo and maybe Federal Credit Union having to go back through their documents and to be able to try to rebut some of this information that's been put forth. Okay, so you called them, but what happened during that conversation? Why didn't you do anything? What did Mr. Cook say to you? This is going to be a tough one. This is going to be interesting because the point is, when do we change the processes? If we see that this is continuing to happen, this is not stop. I mean, that's a lot of money. This is not stopping. And we need to find a way of being able to acknowledge when people need help without making them feel devalued or like they're somehow less of a person just because they had a stroke and they're older and they might not be able to think as well as they used to. So we don't want to beat them down about that, but we do need to have some sort of system in place that really looks out for them. And it almost feels like this fell between the cracks between APS and Navy Federal Credit Union. And it sounds like maybe Navy Federal Credit Union could have taken a more active role. But Navy Federal Credit Union is like, we're a bank. Maybe that's not our role, but we don't know. Maybe we need to change the rules here. Maybe we need to figure this out, a better way of doing this. But I hope that gives you some more information. I'm going to dig a little further into this in some more videos, but at least that gets us started on the complaint. What happened with this, $3.6 million that went to Thailand? Um, yeah. So go ahead and give the video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Mwah. Peace.